Ever wondered which nation holds the title for the most successful in African football? It's a question that piques the curiosity of many, doesn't it? We're going to take a deep dive into the compelling narrative that is the history of African football. The birth of this beloved sport on African soil can be traced back to the later part of the 19th century, when the colonizers introduced the game to the African populace. It was the British soldiers, stationed in the southern tip of the continent, South Africa, who are credited with playing the first ever recorded match in the year 1862. However, the sport did not truly begin to flourish and gain popularity until the dawn of the 20th century. It was during this time that the seeds of African football started to root deeply with the appearance of various clubs and local leagues. These institutions played a crucial role in shaping the face of African football. But it wasn't until the early 20th century that the game began to take root with the establishment of various clubs and local leagues. Fast forward to the 1950s, an era marked by the wave of decolonization. This captivating time in history witnessed a global shift in power dynamics, with nations across Africa gradually breaking the shackles of foreign. It was a much-anticipated dawn of self-determination and sovereignty, characterized by the birth of newly formed independent nations. As these nations embraced their newfound autonomy, they also began to shape their distinct cultural identities. One crucial aspect of their cultural identity was the formation of national football teams. As the global language of sports, football had a profound influence on these emerging nations. It was more than just a game for them, it was a ticket to global recognition, a platform to showcase their talent and resilience amidst the struggles and adversities they faced in their path towards independence. Among these nations, Egypt stood out distinctively. Egypt emerged as the first African nation to participate in the World Cup, making its debut in the 1934 tournament in Italy, a significant milestone in the history of African football. The 1960s marked another turning point, a significant milestone, with the establishment of the Confederation of African Football, popularly known as CAF, in the year 1957. This development, a symbol of unity and progress in African football, represented a new era in the continent's sports scene. The creation of CAF represented the vision, ambition, and determination of several African nations to come together and establish a platform to nurture and showcase their football prowess on an international stage. The establishment was not just about football, but also about continental unity and shared aspirations. This establishment led to the organization of the first ever African Cup of Nations. The tournament, a landmark event, took place in the politically vibrant nation of Sudan in 1957. This event saw teams from different African nations compete with passion and fervor that was previously unseen. The tournament concluded with Egypt emerging as the winners. Egypt's victory set a precedent and marked the beginning of a new journey for African football, setting the pace for other African nations. The 1970s and 80s saw a rise in African football on the global stage. During this era, the world of sports was incredibly dynamic and changing, and nowhere was this more evident than in the continent of Africa, where football was fast becoming not just a pastime, but a passion. Teams from Africa, once considered underdogs, were beginning to make their presence known in a big way, demonstrating both a unique style of play and an energizing spirit that captivated audiences around the globe. Among these emerging powerhouses were teams like Cameroon and Senegal. As they represent their respective nations, they also carry the pride and hopes of Africa, challenging the status quo and shattering preconceived notions about African football. They were not just participating in the World Cup tournaments, they were starting to make their mark, standing toe-to-toe with the traditional football giants. In particular, Cameroon's achievement in 1990 was a watershed moment. They reached the quarterfinals, a feat that sparked a wave of euphoria across the continent. Not only was it an unprecedented achievement for Cameroon, but it was also a milestone for African football. It was a clear statement that they could compete on the world stage, not just as participants, but as contenders. It was an inspiring moment that has yet to be matched by any other African nation, but that continues to fuel the dreams of aspiring footballers in Africa. Cameroon's achievement is a testament to the potential and promise of African football. It is a beacon of hope that continues to inspire new generations of players. It is a story that transcends sports, a testament to the power of belief, perseverance, and the indomitable spirit of the African people. As we look back on these defining moments, we are reminded of the long and challenging journey that African football has undertaken, and the heights it has yet to reach. Teams like Cameroon, Nigeria, and Senegal started making their mark in World Cup tournaments, with Cameroon reaching the quarter-finals in 1990, a feat yet to be matched by any other African nation. In the 1990s and early 2000s, African football continued to flourish. This was an era that saw the transformation of African football, bringing about an evolution that was unprecedented. It was during this time when African clubs began to cultivate their own world-class talents. These extraordinary athletes trained relentlessly, honing their skills and eventually leaving a memorable impact in the major European leagues. They exhibited an exceptional level of performance, setting new records and earning respect and admiration across the globe. Players like George Weah from Liberia, a shining beacon of talent, emerged triumphant by securing the Ballon d'Or in 1995. This was no small feat, marking a milestone in African football history. Another noteworthy individual was Samuel Eto'o from Cameroon, whose prowess led him to become a four-time African Player of the Year. These individuals became emblematic figures of African football, transcending the sport and becoming household names. Fast forward to the present day, African football has come a long way. It has journeyed from the days of little recognition to the current era where it's recognized on international stages. Nations like Egypt, Cameroon, and Nigeria embody this forward momentum. They are the triumvirate leading the march of progress in terms of success in the African Cup of Nations. Each of these nations has their own story of struggle and victory. The African Cup of Nations, a prestigious continental competition, has seen these nations emerge as powerhouses, African football to a level that was previously unimagined. But the crown undoubtedly goes to Egypt as the most successful nation in African football. Egypt's success in this realm is unmatched, distinguishing itself with a record 7 African Cup of Nations titles. This record is unmatched, an indomitable testament to Egypt's football prowess. Their accomplishments extend beyond continental competitions. Egypt has the distinction of being the first African nation to participate in the World Cup, an honor laden with immense pride. This accomplishment has cemented their place in the pantheon of African football, with a record 7 African Cup of Nations titles, and the honor of being the first African nation to participate in the World Cup. Egypt stands tall in the annals of African football. So to sum it all up, African football, with its rich and diverse history, has experienced a remarkable rise in popularity and triumph since its dawn in the twilight of the 19th century. This journey, as exciting and dramatic as the sport itself, had humble beginnings during the early days of colonial rule. As the European powers colonized Africa, they introduced football, a sport that would quickly gain traction and become a symbol of unity and resistance. From dusty streets to makeshift pitches, the seed of football was planted, and it was a seed that would grow amidst the turbulence of change. As the wave of decolonization swept across the continent in the 1950s, football became an integral part of the newly independent nation's identities. It was during this era of change and growth that the Confederation of African Football, CAF, was established in the 1960s. This body has been instrumental in shaping the destiny of African football, organizing tournaments and fostering the development of the sport in the region. In the subsequent decades, the 70s and 80s, African football came into its own on the global stage. African teams began to make their mark, showing the world that they were a force to be reckoned with. The Cup of Nations and their performances in the World Cup served as platforms for these nations to shine. The 1990s and early 2000s saw the emergence of world-class players from the continent. Players, with the world as their stage, showcased their skills, winning accolades and earning recognition for their home countries. Players like Didier Drogba, Samuel Eto'o, and George Weah became household names, transforming the perception of African football. And standing at the pinnacle of success is Egypt, the most successful nation in African football. Quite a thrilling journey, isn't it? I know you have enjoyed this insightful and entertaining clip. Please like and subscribe to this channel to be notified when similar posts are made. Bye for now.